Zola must have known I was coming down the pike when he said, "I came to live out loud." Me too. This first piece, Contagious Enthusiasm, is adapted from my most recent book, Step into Nature. Nature's extravagant enthusiasm has certainly rubbed off on me. When I'm teaching poetry to children, as I have for many years, I know that if I hold anything back, the young writers will do the same. And restraint is not the key that opens the door to creativity. Working with kids, I use everything I've got. Poetry, voice, love, and yes, my way of dress. I want them to know that writing can be an expression of what's in us that has yet to be tamed, may appear unseemly, and material that often surprises the writer with its daring revelations. I push myself past where I'm comfortable so the young writers may see the value in doing that. While the kids are writing, I encourage the classroom teacher to do the same, and I sit and bend to my notebook. Not long ago, I arrived at a high school to work with a class of particularly restless students, high schoolers. The teacher, a tall, attractive woman, dressed in a subdued suit, came up to me while the kids were getting settled. With a bemused smile that turned down at the edges, she said, "I could never dress like you." That wasn't even a backhanded compliment. Ought I have taken a second look before I walked out? I looked down at my flowered blouse, blue striped slacks, and red boots. She continued, "You're brave to wear such colors, and so many of them all at once." And with that shade of lipstick, at your age? At which point her voice faded off. A little too late, she'd become embarrassed. When had I begun arriving at schools dressed in bright assorted colors? When I was 20, I remember walking into an elementary school classroom sporting a crew cut, jeans, and a pair of purple cowboy boots. Why not adorn myself and emulate nature's color range, brilliance, and excess? What we wear can affect our mood and imagination. On a sad day, I'll put on orange for its boldness. If I'm angry, I'll calm myself with blue. If a little fierceness as it is in order, black and red will do the trick. The Nuu-chah-nulth First Nations people from Vancouver Island have a song that goes like this. You whose day it is, get out your rainbow colors and make it beautiful. Why should dressing be any less of a celebration than painting or singing? Isn't everyone the creator of his or her own look? Whether understated or outrageous, shouldn't we feel free to express our inner colors outwardly? My mother raised me to dress conservatively and attractively. Don't mix stripes and plaids, never florals and polka dots. In fact, we are not the kind of women who ever wear polka dots. In high school, I began to rethink this, initially dressing in the clothing of the times. Some of you will remember the long flowing skirts, patched jeans, and I loved my brown floppy hat. But you know, that attire was more or less a uniform of another kind. And I wanted to create my own style, one that reflected the range and contradictions of my personality. A style of adornment that knocked my paisley socks off can be seen in a book of photographs called Natural Fashion, Tribal Decoration from Africa, by Hans Sylvester. Young members of the Surma and Mercy tribes in East Africa's Omo Valley decorate themselves with elements and objects found in their home landscape. They paint their bodies using natural dyes and craft necklaces and hats from what grows around them. Sylvester's photographs show young girls and boys dressed in ways the fashion industry would never consider, but ought to. One girl has placed dry grass atop her head, and at her forehead, like bangs, are big yellow blossoms. Her face is painted ochre with white and brown dots. Another child's face is painted white, and above each ear are clusters of purple and yellow flowers. This is done without the aid of a mirror, neither glass nor pond. Sylvester said, an image of oneself can only be constructed through the eyes of others. One child looks coyly at the camera. Others possess serious expressions. Some faces nearly disappear into the decoration itself. Sylvester continued, these young designers, for that is what they are busy creating all the time. This group of people, living closer to the wealth and wisdom of nature, make my socks look boring by comparison. Their adornment is wildly creative, resembling nothing less than nature's own elaborate flowering.
Yeah, Patrice.
The main character in this piece, that may or may not be fiction, is named Calla Lily, the calling shoes. Downtown last week, I was walking by Kitty's shoes, glancing casually in the shop window when I heard my name. It was not my mother's voice calling from the grave. This was not a dream. Perhaps a friend inside had caught a glimpse of me. Soon as I entered the shop, I knew I'd made a mistake. There wasn't a single familiar face. It was a damn pair of shoes calling out. Oh, Calla Lily, try us on. Wear us. We'll make you happy. We'll make you beautiful. Maybe that's why I didn't leave before it was too late. This had happened before. A couple of times. Maybe a couple more than a couple of times. New shoes are out, I hissed through clenched teeth, trying to figure out which pair knew my name, hoping they wouldn't be open-toed in fine red Italian leather with just a slice of heel. Can't afford you, I said, knowing that I should turn on my heel and flee. Well, what kind of girl do you think I am? I'd just take a peek. How can you go through the day in those clunky, unpolished boots? The still unshoes asked, pleading for simple recognition, calling out their good intentions to beautify my feet. With those shoes on, might I be a better woman? Would a publisher finally offer me the advance I'd been waiting for? Would my step convey a false but desired sense of authority? Or worse, if I leave this store without the begging shoes, will I be bereft, my future coming to no good, to nothing? Damn it. Even before seeing the shoes, my bank account was lighter. The red leather was Italian, The toe was open, there was enough heel to give me a false sense of authority, but not enough to make a cripple out of me. Whoever named this style of shoe mules, they must have been ignorant of the fact that mules are beasts of burden. Come on, you would never get a good day's heavy labor wearing a pair of those shoes. Last pair in stock, a 7.5, the clerk said. Want to try them on? No need, I said. They'll fit just fine. And I tucked the box under my arm while sliding the credit card her way. Our souls will benefit your soul, the shoes said. We'll see about that, I said. A lighter step as I walked out the It's taller than I. The bride without a veil. From the evening that Michael and I were first introduced, not only was it clear that he was the real thing, but that he might be my real thing. And soon I was pretty certain. If I had kept in mind one of our first conversations in which, intending to offer him a compliment, I had said, "Aha, you're a feminist." And he had jokingly, at least I think jokingly, replied, "Don't you ever call me that again." If I'd kept that in mind, I would have known I was entering into dangerous territory. Over a romantic dinner, thinking it was time to secure my position in the relationship, I said, "I want you to know, I mean from the get-go, I really like you a lot, but I will never marry you. Marriage turns women into chattel." Without missing an iota of a beat, Michael said, "Who's asking?" That was the exact moment I knew I wanted to marry him. I mean, he had everything. He was handsome and smart and hardworking, and he was kind to his mother. And perhaps most of all, he was quick. Clearly, I couldn't knock him over, and I really liked that. Could I marry and still be a feminist? Not only had I never banked on marriage, it had never had any appeal, and feminism was only one reason why. I had been a colicky baby. I kept my working mother up all night over and over. She'd sit in the rocking chair holding me a bottle of beer or a cigarette in the other hand, and she would sing. Mostly she alternated between two songs. The one she made up had only a single line that in its entirety went like this. "My pretty Patrice, the prettiest girl in the world." The other song she favored during those sleepless nights was longer. But the memorable part was the chorus she repeated over and over like a mantra. "I wish I were single again. I wish I were single again." And she sang about as well as I did. Lest you think that pretty and single were the only attributes my mother valued, I'll tell you this. When I was about 4, riding with her up to her office, the elevator man, back in the days when you had elevator men, a man about whom my mother was quite fond, He said to her, "Peggy, your daughter is a doll." Her quick retort imprinted forever on my brain. "No, sir. My daughter is not a doll. A doll is an empty-headed dummy. My daughter is certainly not that." When I was 7 years old, on the morning of my first communion, dressed like a mini bride, my mother stood behind me with her hands firmly on my shoulders, directing my gaze. "Look at yourself in the mirror now," she said. "You will never see yourself in a veil again." It wasn't that she didn't wish me happiness. She actually did. She just went about it kind of funny. Her indoctrination took hold well. Shortly after that, I remember walking by a bridal shop with a young friend who drooled over the dresses, while I saw nothing of note in that storefront window. As I grew, an interest in marriage and motherhood did not grow with me. It wasn't that I didn't want love, I just couldn't conceive of partaking in the patriarchal institution of marriage. I saw what it had done to my mother. She had given up her dreams of an independent life for the sake of convention. And yes, love, marrying a man who never washed a single dish or grocery shopped in their 15 years together. Though late to the party, in my late 30s, the right man finally changed my anti-marriage stance. Having followed my dreams for a very long time, I had become confident that marriage wasn't going to undo that. In fact, I'd begun to realize that the love Michael and I shared was a powerful dream strengthener. A few years after we'd begun living together, I would occasionally say, "You know, if you asked me to marry you, I would say yes." His reply was reliably, unfortunately, consistent. "Oh no, babe, you're safe with me." It wasn't that I wasn't feminist enough to ask him, but I knew that if I was going to marry, it would be one time in this life, and I wanted the pleasure of being asked. When he finally did propose, he did so most romantically at the gates to Siena, Italy. My simple spaghetti-strap, floor-length, off-white wedding gown was created by local dress designer Erica Engelman. Every time I went in for a fitting, she would ask, "Patrice, how about a veil?" And each time my answer was, "Thanks, but no, I can't." And that was that. At the final fitting, the dress was perfect. Surprisingly, the 43-year-old woman who faced me in the mirror looked a lot like a bride. Before slipping off the gown, I turned to Erica, my heart thumping wildly, and said, "How about that veil?" On my wedding day, I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. No shoulder-grazing tool for me. The 6-foot-plus long veil floated behind me. Just after the ceremony, my 3-year-old niece came up to me. "Are you a princess?" I looked around. Surely she couldn't be talking to me. Laurel pulled my dress and repeated her question. A princess, that was the furthest thing from my dreams. The word chattel clattered in my ear. But understandably, that long white dress and even longer veil did give off hints of princess. So I took a long, deep breath, and I turned to her. "Yes, Laurel, just for today, I'm a princess."
to my head, and you linger like a haunting refrain. And I find you spinning round in my brain, like the bubbles in a glass of champagne.
This hat, the clothing of the dead. Flipping through my Rolodex, yes, I still use a Rolodex, there are the names and addresses of the living, but also of the dead. At a certain point, I stopped pulling the cards for friends and family who had left. It felt like ripping up the memories. Though not in their physical forms, they're still with me, really, and at times as close or closer than many of the living. Open my bedroom closet or my bureau drawers, and it's the same story. The clothing of the dead hang on. There are pieces from girlfriends who died young. Diana's red floral blouse, Allie's long black skirt, a few shirts that belonged to my father-in-law Roy, and clothes that belonged to my parents. Some of it I wear, some of it waits, as if the true owners may be returning. My father's glasses sit on a shelf, and every now and then I'll put them on and try to see the world momentarily through his eyes. I'm hardly unique in my affection for dead people's clothing. Maybe you wear it too. That way you get to feel the person near you. My mother-in-law Barbara told me that following the death of her beloved aunt, she was given her aunt's red raincoat. When Barbara puts it on, she says, "Okay, Annie, we're going out on the town." Each of my parents had articles of clothing that when I was very young, I loved so much, I named them. My father had what I call his Christmas shirt. Not that he wore it only during the holidays, but because of the red and green snowflakes against a pale background, even in April, or even in early November, it looks like Christmas to me. I remember when that shirt began to tatter, and he relegated it to the back of his closet. After I had thoroughly worn him down, he relented and gave it to me. The shirt required repair work that I was happy to provide, a turning down of the frayed collar, a turning up of the frayed cuffs. By the time I was in junior high school, I had well developed the skill of wearing my parents down when I really wanted something. Such was the story of the knee-high brown, high-heeled lace-up boots that sat in the Morris Abrams shoe store window in downtown San Cruz. I'd gone in to try those boots on so many times, I had nearly worn them out. When my father picked me up after school, the first day I wore those stylish boots, I approached the car sock-footed, sheepishly carrying the calf-hugging beauties in one hand. He reveled in, "I told you so." But because I loved the boots, I got good at walking in them. That's when I first became aware of the link between fashion and pain, but long before I began to question the perversity of it. Once, my high school friend Cindy and I imbibed some seriously mind-altering substance and hitchhiked to San Francisco on a school day. She in her black lace-up boots and her mother's panther coat, me in my brown boots and my mother's Stone Martin fox cape. My friend and I even daringly climbed a tree near Ghirardelli Square dressed like that. Not until right thinking got the best of me, and sadly that took a while, did I relinquish the luxurious cape. Those boots went perfectly with my mother's stew suit. Stew suit got its name because the fabric's colors, orange, brown, and green, reminded me of my mother's pot of stew bubbling on the stove. Stew was pretty much my least favorite dinner, but I did appreciate its autumn colors. Before my New York City working woman mother had gotten married, she'd spent much of her expendable cash on gorgeous clothing, mostly from B. Altman's on Fifth Avenue. Her svelte figure must have cost plenty of heads to turn. The stew suit jacket was fitted, double-breasted, and had cloth-covered buttons. Straight and tight, the skirt fit me well in high school, but then my grandmother's Italian hips took their rightful place of what little boniness this body had. And that skirt has been relegated to the back of my closet ever since. If I were a better person, I would give it away, but I am not a better person. My father was a shoe person. He had more shoes than most middle-income women. They were slightly quirky crepe-soled suede Clarks and others that laced on the side, not in the middle. Some months after my mother left him, I asked if he'd ever married again. "God damn it!" he shouted, turning red. "Hell no! Never again will anybody tell me how many pairs of shoes I can own or how long I can spend in the shower." My father didn't keep articles of clothing that had once belonged to his dead, except for the onyx ring that was his father's, the ring my mother had coveted for years that he denied her, finally giving it to me at a rare moment when he wanted to express his pride in something I had done. I wear it every day. Instead, if my father wanted a visit with his dead, he would take a shower, reporting to me later. "Uncle Louis visited this morning. We had a good long talk. On other days, it was my grandmother or his sister Veronica, who had died when she was only 50. Why his dead chose to communicate with him when he was in the nude, I will never know." My father was also a hat aficionado. He had a flair for wearing hats over his full head of lustrous hair, a head that never, not in 93 years, went bald. He had a hat for every occasion and then some. Greek fishermen's caps, stocking caps, the top hat he wore when he walked me down the aisle, receiving more attention than his daughter, the bride. A train conductor's hat, a few cowboy hats, though a cowboy was the last thing my dad was. When he was a young man, he usually wore pork pie hats. I have one of his now moth-eaten plaid wool ones. In my early 20s, when I went to Venice, it would have been unthinkable to come home without a gondolier's hat. And yes, he wore that one too. Certain hats, though, he didn't wear anymore after he stopped smoking cigars. Cancer treatment, he told me, made the cigars taste funny. I guess it made some hats feel funny on his head. Since his death last year, one of his straw hats has become my walking hat. It sports a whale pin on the front. I'm not what one would call a whale person, but I would never remove his black breeching whale. To make it mine, I've added a feather. For a bird person, I am. A few times over this past year, my pop has come back to let me know he's watching me from afar. On Friday evening, about an hour before opening night of this production, the wristwatch that he had found on a park bench in Santa Cruz stopped, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I realized it was him. He wanted to stop time for me so that I might linger and enjoy the moment. When I came back yesterday for the matinee, the watch began to work again. In one of my drawers, there are a few of my father's caps that I will never wear. They're wrapped up tightly, one inside the other. Every now and then, I open the drawer, reach to the back for the ball of hats, loosening one from the other very quickly so not much air gets into that mass of knitted wool and cotton. I press my whole face into the fabric. Breathing in my father is as close to him as I can get. He smelled musky sweet and oily. Oily not in a bad way, in the right way. Being Southern Italian, my dad had gorgeous skin. Maybe it's because of the centuries of olive and olive oil eating and working in olives. I miss kissing my father's cheek and then rubbing my lips together as though I had put on lip balm. My mother, too, had a scent. Before she died at 65, she and I hadn't seen each other for 5 years. She was a mentally unstable alcoholic, and she had disowned me, her firstborn child. The day the hospital called to tell me she'd been found unconscious in her car and was in a coma, I rushed over, watched her uneven breathing, and braced myself. When at last she opened her eyes, she fixed her piercing but confused stare at me and said, "You haven't been to dinner lately. How come?" A very good cook. My mother was always up for a party and loved to make dinner for others, and she never wore an apron. In the old days, she'd come home from work and cook dinner still wearing her high heels. I loved how effortlessly she moved across the kitchen in those tall, shiny shoes. Later, as the culture relaxed, she did too, at least in terms of her appearance, changing into her slippers before preparing dinner. In those days, as though it were a uniform, she wore the unfortunately popular polyester pantsuit. Do you remember that? Her favorite one was navy blue with white piping. I cringed to be seen in public with her when she had it on. But thanks to our next president, Hillary Clinton, my take on the pantsuit has improved significantly. And if she could do that for an item of clothing, just think what she'll do for our roads and bridges for global warming. So it figured, if my hospitalized mother was going to say something entirely absurd, her brain having hemorrhaged, just waking from a coma, having not seen her daughter for all those years, it figured she'd mention dinner. At 29, I wasn't particularly good at apologizing, especially when I'd done nothing wrong. But that's what I did. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words sounded frail and teeny in my mouth. And after a big breath and a pummeling of my heart, I said, "I promise to come to dinner often from now on." It was a few hours later before she noticed what I was wearing, raised an eyebrow, and motioned me close to her bedside. She pulled at my shirt as if to forcibly remove the wrinkles. been in a hurry to get here," I explained. Less than 10 days later, she died. I went to her house and scavenged through her bureau drawers looking for a particular sweater, a baby blue one, that had once looked good on her, worn with casual slacks or a straight skirt and stockings, heels or flats, and a single strand of pearls. The sweater had gotten old and worn, so she'd begun to don it to do housework. While wearing it to paint her house once, it got so splattered with white it was now nearly polka dotted. I stuffed the sweater into a black plastic bag and brought it home, placed it under my pillow. For 2 entire weeks, the sweater kept my mother alive. Each night, I inhaled her, falling asleep to the familiar mixture of Chanel No. 5, cigarette smoke, cheap sherry, and garlic. After she was gone from the blue sweater, I took it out from under my pillow and tossed it in the trash. And there she is, my mother. And in case you think I have a dresser back there, I don't. And for an extra $20, I welcome you after the show to come take a look at that dressing. Looking for the perfect dress. How many times in my life have I gone out walking along a city street in search of the perfect dress? When I was a young woman, upon occasion, a bit of extra money would fall from the sky and land right in my pocket. And lest it spend itself on the mounting bills, and since I am forever my mother's daughter, I would go out looking for a dress, be it in a boutique or a thrift shop. My mother had a particular way of walking into a women's clothing store. It was unlike how she walked into her office each morning or back home at the end of the day. Her brisk pace slowed down, but retained its deliberateness. She'd get a look in her eye and scan the room, casting her gaze widely. She would search for what other women had missed, the 1 or 2 items that would speak to her, be it an article of clothing for herself or when I was a child, for me. If I were lucky, she'd zero in on something, grab my pudgy hand, and picking up the pace, we'd go off for the gold. That gift is one of the most prized of my inheritance. One time, I walked excitedly but unhurriedly down Pacific Avenue in Santa Cruz, hoping to slip into the black cotton lace dress I had seen in a shop window weeks earlier. Lucky for me, at Cat and Canary, there it was, in my size, still on the rack, now that I finally had the cash to wear it home. With its open neck and tight bodice and long, wide, almost see-through skirt, many years later, that dress, this dress, has remained a favorite. Recently, my husband and I went to New York City for a vacation. At least that's why he thought we were going. And yes, of course, we did the typical New York things, a Broadway show, museums, jostling along the city sidewalks and in the steamy subway, shoulder to shoulder with the glut of humanity. What Michael didn't know, and still doesn't know, and those of you who may know him, I ask you to keep this secret, is that the real reason I wanted to go back to the city of my birth wasn't for those fun things, nor for the nostalgic return to the Upper Manhattan neighborhood of my childhood. The true reason that I was game for that vacay. Have you guessed it? Yes. It would be an opportunity to go shopping, unlike anything available to me here. Like most men, Michael doesn't particularly enjoy being the lone gent in women's clothing stores, but he dislikes it less than he used to, for one very good reason. He enjoys giving me pleasure of many kinds. The timing had to be judicious. We'd arrive at a certain boutique early, just after opening, a wanton attempt to increase my chances that Michael would be willing to linger long enough for me to browse and try things on, if not till my heart's content, at least before a bevy of broads could overwhelm him. That it was pouring outside worked in my favor. You see, or you know, for many of us, maybe some of you, looking for the perfect dress and purchasing that dress are two entirely different things. Looking for the perfect dress, it's all about possibility. It's as close to hunting as I hope I will ever become. The amount of joy we receive from anticipation may depend on how often our anticipation is met with fulfillment. The degree of joy that I get from just the thought of going shopping will tell you more about my love of beautiful things, and in particular those I can put on my body, than you ought to know. And if this proves that I am a shallow woman, what can I say? Beauty does something for me, as it does for most of us in its innumerable forms. Through whichever sense it reaches us, a wide open vista that our eyes behold, or honey on the tongue, beauty seduces and claims us. Michael liked that the shop was nearly empty. He liked that it was raining too hard to be taking a leisurely stroll through Central Park. The black crepe dress with the white top stitching and the embroidered blouse that we carried out of the shop make me happy. Of course, I could go shopping alone, and you know that I do. But watching Michael get happy, watching me get happy, is another thing altogether. To say nothing of the pleasure of receiving a gift. Truth is, there is no perfect dress. There will never be a perfect dress. There is only the elusive, potentially next perfect dress, the one that I will have to spend some months waiting for before doing my best to convince Michael to take me out looking for it yet again. This last story also features the character Calla Lily, Great Aunt Lily. Do you make lists? I do. From childhood Christmas and birthday lists to the to-do lists of my everyday. Starting when I was in high school and continuing until I hit about 40, I repeatedly made a list called The Things I Hate About My Body. Sometimes I wrote it down, and sometimes I stood in front of the mirror, repeating the hated parts over and over again until I was in tears. There were 4 items reliably on the list: chin, neck, belly, thighs. Why did I never make the companion list? Things I love about my body. Would there have been too few items to constitute a list? It's a sad thing to neglect to love one's body. We ask so much of them. Ought we not love them just a little? The changes in my body as I get older ought to be seen as battle scars. The battle with life, time, and gravity that everyone loses eventually. The lines on my face all have their messages to convey too, except that nobody wants to read them. The diagonal line below my right eye is for the disappointment I have felt in my country. The vertical lines on my forehead, resembling jail cell bars, are for all the things that I have tried to understand. And though you may find it hard to believe, the fine lines around my mouth are the result of not saying all the things I wanted to. Let me tell you about my great Aunt Lillian. One day, not too long ago, the last time I saw my old auntie, I was bemoaning something about my aging body, about its downward pull relationship with gravity. At her advanced age, Lillian knows more about that than I do. And she was quick, not to put me in my place as she could have, but to enlighten me. "Calla Lily," she said, as we sat on her front porch drinking peach liqueur. "Here's what I do. Every now and then, when I am feeling particularly old and droopy, I take off all my clothes, stand in front of the big mirror, twirl around a few times, jiggle a little, and say, 'Not bad for 97. You should try it. And look at me, darling, would you? I sag everywhere. Once I had little bags under my eyes. Now I could carry a week's groceries home with them. But do I care? Nope. Not a goddamn bit." Lillian slapped her thigh and laughed at herself for being unrestrained. "When I die, honey, you're going to have to remember this for yourself. Just pretend I'm talking to you, Calla Lily. Look at you. How pretty. Get that man of yours, 'cause you've got a good one, to tell you how lovely you are," she said, stroking my face. Lovely. Thank you.